everyone, it's Paul Ward here, and welcome to another edition of Farm Talk. We're out here in Ojai, California. Our guest today is a true artisan and a coffee roaster, Carlos Ramirez. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And you own a company called Bonito Coffee.
Yeah, it's Bonito Coffee Roaster. And the name came about because Bonito is very generalized in Spanish. So it's like you use it for moments. So like Bonito moments, where it's like beautiful moments. And I feel like that's what a coffee cup can bring. You know, in Nicaragua, what we do is we gather around and we drink coffee. I think like maybe in the United States is like you drink beer. Here it's like that's in Nicaragua, the equivalent is to drink coffee with someone you really appreciate and friends. And then you just get to talking before you know it. You've had, 2-3 cups of coffee any time of the day.
You grew up in Nicaragua.
I grew up in Nicaragua. I moved to the United States in 2005, at the end of 2005. I moved to LA. I lived 10 years in LA. Got married. We had 2 kids, and the traffic and putting kids in a car seat got a little bit too much for us. And my wife was like, why don't we move to a smaller town? And that meant that I had to quit my job at Dole, and because I was traveling a lot, and that, most of the flights come out of LAX. And I was like, I'm willing to let go of this corporate job. And I didn't know what to do at first, but when I came to the States, I came with the plan to save up money and to go back to Nicaragua and buy a coffee farm. I grew up in a coffee town where most of the mountains are filled with jungle and coffee. And most of the people that I went to school with had a coffee estate or a coffee farm. Similar to wine, they're really hard to get. Coffee is very sought after, so if you didn't inherit the farm or didn't have enough money to buy the farm, it's still a hard business to get into. But some farmers are already established, and I went to school with all of them, and their parents would send them to work in the summers, and I would go with them. And as a 5-year-old, my grandfather was a coffee mechanic in the town. So what he'd do is he fixed coffee processing machines. He'd kind of like romanticize going to these farms. He'd be like, vamos a la montaña, which means like, let's go to the mountains. And I was like, where is this place? And as a 5-year-old, everything's big.
Sure.
Everything seems like huge. So if I take you there now, and with the size that we are, and I'm 43, it doesn't seem like it's a big place.
Right.
But as a 5-year-old, it seemed like this mystical, beautiful place. The word beautiful kept coming up. So that's why I named my roaster Bonito Coffee Roaster. And also I wanted a word that everybody can kind of like pronounce in English too. So bonito, bonito, bonito. And my wife can pronounce it. She's from Denver. That's how it came about.
You started roasting in a shed, is that correct?
So when we moved to Ojai, all I would do is grab my bike and bike around town, or take my kids to the park and then come right back. And there was this connection that kind of like started to happen, where I started seeing a parallel with my town in Nicaragua.
So, between here and there?
Between here and there. Prior to this, I was in LA, where it's like go, go, go.
Right.
You get in your car, you get stuff done. You can get like 5 errands done in a matter of 2 hours in LA. Here, Ojai is a more slower pace.
Sure.
And everybody says hi. And after a couple months, I was probably just saying hi to people. People already knew me as the guy in the bicycle with his kids. So I told my wife, I was like, see that little shed that's like dilapidated and falling down? That's gonna be my coffee roaster. It would really run down. It looked ugly. I tore off the roof and kind of like just did like a little Nicaraguan roof where it's like no engineering to it. It's just like a lot of planks. I started roasting in a 5-kilo roaster. A 1-kilo roaster, and giving my coffee away.
Giving it away for free.
Giving it away for free. See what people thought. And my goal was to get my grandmother's recipe. That was my goal.
And was she still around?
My grandma's still around. She still lives in the town that I grew up in, Nicaragua. She's 88 now. When I left Nicaragua in 2005, she was still roasting.
And she has a reputation there that people
Well,
know her as the
the
coffee
thing is,
roaster?
in Nicaragua, it's like there is no coffee roaster. Everybody roasts their own coffee.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
People go to the market. You buy coffee like you would buy lettuce here at a farmer's market. You have 3 different vendors, 3 different choices. You smell it to see if it has aroma. Maybe to see if you can come up with the variety of the coffee. You take it home and you roast it on a pan with a wood paddle. And you just roast and roast and roast. And that smell, you smell it in different houses. You can say like, oh, such and such is roasting today. Oh, such and such is roasting today. So yeah, so it's part of the community. It's part of like kind of like the tapestry there. But there is no coffee roaster.
Interesting.
There's coffee farmers, and that's how you get your different varieties of coffee.
Right.
But there's no coffee roaster.
Interesting. And how do you, well, you roast and then you sell fresh, right? I mean, the beans that you're selling are just recently roasted, right? They're not stale or a month old or 2 months old. You just roasted them like the day before.
Right. So part of the recipe, my grandma's roast, and why I feel like the best cup of coffee I've ever had is a cup of coffee from my grandmother. But she goes to the market, she buys it, she roasts it, and then she brews it. And even the way she brews it has a specialty to it, right? All that was in my blood. And I think like a big part of the equation is to roast fresh. A lot of people roast,
Right.
but because of the system of the food here in the United States, it has to go through a factory, a roaster, another distribution center, travel a bit, and then get to the supermarket. And so if you eliminate all that, you get fresh coffee.
I don't know if I've ever had it, honestly.
Fresh coffee.
If I think about it, I mean, because
Well-
it's probably it wasn't roasted yesterday.
Yeah, and I think like most Americans, I mean, I don't have a number, but most Americans have not had fresh coffee. They've had old coffee.
Sure. It was freeze dried, right? And the sealed bag.
Sealed bag
not
and
the same.
all that. But there is something that I've learned through roasting is that when you're roasting, you're opening the pores of the coffee bean. And what comes out of it, which is the CO2, gives the aroma, the fragrance. And after a month, it's like that diminishing return. Like you are going to reach a peak of freshness and of deliciousness. And then after that, it's not that coffee is not going to taste like coffee, but all those complexities, the nuances of the flavors will go away. They'll just dissipate in the air because they're just all gone. And then all you have is caffeine.
Which is the addiction, probably, right?
Which is the addiction, exactly, yeah.
Right.
Which is that,
It's only-
I mean, I feel like people should not feel bad for feeling addicted to caffeine. I know there's a thing about like, oh, coffee's a drug, and I feel like coffee's like a gratitude plant, like just like tea, where it can become ceremonial, where it's ritual. At least that's how people that farm it take it. And when you talked about like every farmer starts their day with a cup of coffee, that's what they're looking for, is to start that day. And that, I think like that's like, yeah, it could be looked upon as a addiction. I think like I would go more of like, if I had to eliminate something in caffeine, is the quantity and the sizes that we drink in the United States. Because, you know, you're doing those big, huge amounts of coffee when the body doesn't need that.
Right. You can
Yeah.
still get the gratification from a much smaller amount.
From smaller amount.
Yeah.
And then you'll see that then you can probably have a cup of coffee in the afternoon and it won't affect you. You'll still go to sleep, you know?
Right.
At least that's my case, because when I drink coffee for the taste, not for the caffeine.
Right.
And that's why I'm looking always for that freshness. Super fresh coffee is the coffee that makes my heart sing. The only secret is that I have the connection in my town, and I can say like, oh, this farmer's doing a really good job with this coffee, and it's this type of Arabica variety, Pacamara, Catuai, or Bourbon. Those are 3 of the ones that I carry. There's a lot more to them, and each plant will taste different. So I'm always chasing the plant.
Interesting. And speaking of that, where do you get your beans?
I get them. 90% of my beans come from my town in Nicaragua,
Okay.
and that's what I'm trying to build, the tincture, to know the farmer. So I know where that coffee comes from, literally. I've walked the farms. I've gone up the hill, because I don't buy coffee from conglomerates.
Sure. You're buying from the farmer.
Yeah, and it might be a privilege. It might be a privilege that I have to do that. I get to do that, because most coffee companies, what they buy is a contract, and because it's bulk, it's huge. They're huge amounts. I mean, the United States consumes an enormous amount of coffee. I am boutique-y, but I have the faith and the plan ahead that this can become something big if I grow it slowly enough so that everybody can have a fresh cup of coffee.
So the beans are grown in Nicaragua and then either flown or shipped here, and you get them direct. I mean, they're shipped to you.
They're shipped directly to Ojai, and my friend is in charge of all that. So he has like a processing plant and an exporter's license. So he puts it on the ship. Coffee is harvested once a year. The harvest starts in December, and it ends right about the end of February. And then from there, it gets picked. We have a process called the specialty coffee process, where we eliminate all the defects that coffee picking can be, because coffee is hand picked, so it's not computerized, which is the other thing that's so mind-boggling to me, because it's a person that's picking every single little bean.
It's a lot of labor.
It's a lot of labor. And then after that gets to the processing plant, and then there's other people picking one by one, that all the coffee is the same size, same color, and no defect. So that when I get it here as a roaster, I have to give it that respect. I have to give it as much respect as that campesina lady, which is like the steward of the land that's worked there generations. Her great-grandmother, whoever has worked there, and her kid is gonna work in that farm, and they're gonna pick that ripe cherry that's the right bean, so that I can get it here in the United States and do the same.
It sounds like there's a tremendous amount of love in your work.
Oh yeah. I was talking to you earlier about the flow, and I think like I found that in coffee. I didn't know. It was like a full circle for me, that my grandfather taking me to coffee farms while he was going and working on a coffee machine was going to be part of my life purpose. And not that I don't have any other purposes. You know, I've got my family, I've got my kids, and
Sure.
and I've got other things that I love, my friends and the Ojai community, which has given me so much. Like I said, it's like very parallel with my town in Nicaragua. The connection through coffee and the connection to community through coffee is just incredible. So if I can like put enough love to that roasting part, then that love just continues to spread throughout the community.
Right.
Which is what has happened in the 5 years. I started in the shed for 3 years. For a full year, I gave my coffee away. I remember, I don't know if you guys know Eric and the Animals. I didn't know who he was, really, but he approached me. He lived here he was big in the Beatles era, like British guy, used to live here. And he had a concert at Libby Bowl. And he said, I have a song called The House of the Rising Sun. And I was like, I've heard that song. And he's like, well, my coffee's going to be called The House of the Rising Sun, which is like, it makes total sense with coffee, right? Like it's a little sun and it's the rising sun. It's in the morning when you have coffee, blah, blah. I was like, oh, this is a great idea. I'll do a sticker for you. I'll cold roast it. He's like, I only need 100 pounds and it's for all my VIPs that are coming to see me. And I roasted that. And I remember that, you know, like everything, like very serendipitous. Me meeting Eric was very serendipitous from me moving from that shed to having like the guts to say like, I am going to go get a warehouse and a bigger roaster, because in the 1 kilo machine, it took me all night to roast 100 pounds and pack it to give it to Eric for his concert. And I wanted him to have it fresh. So it was like, okay, there's going to be someone else that's going to want 100 pounds.
Right.
And I can't spend nights. That's the other thing. Like, since I was raised in a farm, I go to sleep early and I wake up early. So I was like, me staying up at night till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning roasting was not good. So I fastly found out that I can finance the bigger roaster. And then I went to the Ojai hall to get my business license. And they're like, well, you can't roast there. And I was like, but wait, Ojai Roasting Company's roasting right on the avenue. They're like, they're grandfathered in. And people have said, you know, they don't like the smell. I was like, who doesn't like the smell of roasting
So
coffee?
city zoning ordinances were kind of getting in your way.
Yeah, but that I didn't give up. So I went and I was like, well, then where do you want me to roast? Because I'm going to roast. And, well, we want you in the business section, manufacturing, which now we've called Bryant Circle, that part. And I went over and I knocked on everybody's door and I was like, do you know of anything that's for rent? Do you know anything? And Raw Food was in where I'm at right now. And the manager was there and he's like, you know what? We're moving to Oxnard because we found space that's cheaper for square footage. And it makes total sense for our operation because we're growing. And I was like, can I put down my name for when this place comes to be? And
Just knocking on doors.
Just knocking on doors. And then it happened. And then my knees were buckling because I had to sign a contract saying a 3-year lease, you know, that I was going to pay X amount for this rental and that it was going to increase 3% every year. And I was like, oh my God, to me, make that much money? Can I make that much money selling coffee? I don't think so. But I signed it anyway. After that, what ended up happening was I paid 6 months without even having a roaster there. I was still roasting at in the shed as I took more clients. And one thing that I was really watchful for was that freshness was there, and that it made it simple for people to understand coffee, because coffee can sometimes become very bougie, and coffee shouldn't be like that. Coffee is like the most, like what you said, it's like what farmers start with. It's the most simple thing. It's like, I always push for going back to simplicity, having less, minimizing, so that I'm not stressed out. And I think like that's coffee. Like that, for me, that's coffee. Knowing that, I think where it starts to get like coffee's unattainable, like the good coffee that, like what I'm talking about, is because people withhold knowledge. But this is knowledge that people have been roasting for millennia.
Right.
My great-grandfather planted his own coffee trees, harvested them, roasted them, and drank them forever. Right. So in the ranch that my grandma has, there's about 100 trees. And I asked my grandma, I was like, where are these trees coming from? Oh, one day, Papa, which is her dad, said, I'm going to stop buying coffee. I can plant it myself. And he planted it himself. He grew it. But my grandfather was a cowboy. He was like, what his business was to rent his land for people to bring in their cow, and the cow would get fat, and then after the cow would get fat, he'd give it back, and then he'd get money for renting that piece of land. So, but coffee wasn't his business. But anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that coffee is very simple. It's not a
complex, difficult.
Yeah, no, the flavor is complex, but not how it got to that flavor is complex.
And you grow many different flavors, or you roast different flavors, or
right,
create different flavors.
So yeah, but not to be mistaken with like flavored coffee, because there is flavored coffee, which I don't know where that came from.
Artificially created.
Like coffee that tastes like hazelnut, and coffee that tastes like, that's not what we do. So coffee in Nicaragua is like wine, so there's estates, right? And let's say your neighbor has an estate and he decided that he was gonna grab a subspecies of Arabica that he brought from Panama or from El Salvador or on his coffee trip to Brazil, because he has the money to fly to Brazil.
Right.
And he brought back 100 plants of this variety of coffee. So let's say he brings one of my favorite varieties, a Caturra, right? He brings that Caturra from Brazil and plants it in Nicaragua. The soil in Brazil is different from the soil in Nicaragua. The amount of rain that Brazil gets is different from the amount of rain than the one they get in Nicaragua. And also, what if the farm in Brazil is close to the ocean and the farm in Nicaragua is closer to the inlands?
Sure.
So that Caturra that they brought from Brazil is going to taste way different
than in Brazil.
Than the one in Brazil. Yeah. So once it's planted in Nicaragua, because the terroir is different, the microclimate is different. That plant takes a whole other, and that's what I'm interested in. As an agricultural geek, because I studied agriculture, I love that part of coffee. It's an Arabica plant, but it's a subspecies of it. Like, let me tell you like a cool story that I heard. I don't know if it's true, but they say that the king of France, while he was in Africa or something on one of his trips, brought back a coffee plant and put it in his greenhouse in France. He liked the plant so much that he says, like, I'm gonna make an estate out of this. Like, I want more of these plants. So he took it to an island, it's called the Bourbon Island, which is off of Madagascar in Africa. So what ends up happening is that he created a variety called Bourbon. But it's from an Arabica plant that might have come from the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen or from Ethiopia, where coffee is born.
Right.
So then, but he changed the plant.
Tastes different.
It tastes different. And then he was able to probably even give it to friends, and then it got propagated to the point that it gets to Brazil. And then from Brazil, it gets to Central America, which is where I'm from. So that coffee's grown in Peru, but the biggest player of all these is Brazil. So you got Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador.
Are they the more corporate kind of growers that are gonna ship to the big?
They're huge.
Yeah.
In some ways, they have a lot of saying in what the coffee price, because coffee is a commodity like oil or like gold, and so it gets exchanged and it gets traded, that's a whole other different story, and why farmers are suffering because of that concept. Going back to the variety, that plant propagated through Latin America to the point that then we have Bourbon in El Salvador, or Bourbon in Guatemala, or Bourbon in Honduras and Nicaragua. Each plant tastes different, and that's where my flavors come in. And that's what I wanted to showcase with my coffee. I was like, have your coffee black because it tastes delicious. if you give it a chance to say like, okay, this is a pacamara, and it's a pacamara from Nicaragua. And it was grown from René Paguaga. And that guy has this pacamara that just tastes like citrus, caramel, and cane sugar, right?
Wow.
And then you have my friend Sid his name's Siddhartha, which is a very cool name. He has a Bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened with Sid was he inherited the farm with his father, and they lived here in the United States, and they had to get out of El Salvador, so they didn't know what they had.
Right.
But then a pest came through and took down all the Bourbon plants, right? So everybody else started planting something different that was more resistant to this pest. They didn't touch it. And now they have this old plant where they only have a garden. And Sid gave it to me and he's like,
Right.
what do you think about this coffee? And I was like, this coffee's delicious. You can't get this coffee anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like that old world coffee that tastes like chocolate
Right.
and marzipan.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get that anymore. All the newer coffees are tasting a little bit more fruitier and more fruitier and more fruitier because that's where coffee's going. Coffee's going to where, like, I think, and this is just my opinion, I feel like people think like, I want a natural from Ethiopia because it tastes like blueberries. I like how that coffee doesn't taste like coffee,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I've got to be careful with saying like coffee tastes like coffee because coffee is very subjective.
Mm-hmm.
Someone once told me the best coffee is the coffee you like, not the coffee what someone says is the best coffee. My coffee doesn't have flavors because I add flavors to it. My coffee has flavors because each coffee is a different plant.
Interesting. Now, are your flavors changing based on what you're getting, what you're receiving? Or are you kind of at the point where you kind of know that you're going to get so much Bourbon delivered?
Very good question. So I have to be very careful with that because the Bourbon from last year's crop will probably not taste like this other year's crop because probably didn't have enough rain.
So it's just like wine, like you said.
Yeah, it's like wine.
Yeah.
It probably won't have enough rain.
Mm-hmm.
So that plant, as it matures, will start tasting different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my job to cup it and to say subjectively with other people, I taste this. Do you taste that? And they're like, yeah, I taste that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also taste this other thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's in the back end of that, of what I tasted. Because everybody's palates is different too.
Right.
So I have to get calibrated with other people as well so that it's kind of like a shot in the dark.
Right.
But once 2 or 3 people are tasting what you're tasting, you're like, okay, we've got something here.
Right.
And we're going to run with this.
So now that you have a reputation, and how are you distributing locally?
I started distributing on my bike, because we
On
were
your
very
bicycle?
little. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
we started on our bike. Now I get an email or a text, and I was like, hey, Carlos, we need coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And I know
Restaurants and shops and...
restaurants and hotels.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at Love Cafe with our dark roast. We're at the Duchess. We're in all 3 of the hotels here in Ojai. We're in Montecito in a coffee shop called Merci, which is super delicious. So yeah, we're just growing that way. I have a personal connection with all the business owners. All the business owners kind of like, they jive with me. So I've done business kind of that way. And now it's my job to kind of like hand it over so that it can like expand and I can concentrate more on like the farmer, the roast, the taste.
Sure.
But that's basically what we do. We deliver locally in Ojai every Friday.
To local stores or to farmers markets? Or?
No, like house to house.
Really?
I kind of thought about this kind of like, you used to get your milk at your house.
Right.
Well, now you get your coffee at your house, like
And
your
is
weekly consumption.
So
of
is it
coffee.
already brewed and hot, or is it...
It's for you to brew. It's a 12-ounce bag. You can go online and you just hit local delivery, and we do that.
Very cool. So what are you finding that are the favorite flavors right now?
The favorite flavor right now, the one that we sell the most is, if we go by that, I think it's, I know it's the pacamara. It's my grandma's recipe, pretty much.
So your grandma had it right all along.
All along, yeah. I know, yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so the pacamara is the one that we sell the most, yeah.
So how would people find you? What's your website? What's the best way to reach out to you and find out more about Bonito Coffee?
It's bonitocoffee.com. Just go to the website, and really easy to order, either on your phone or on the web on the computer. Yeah. And we also have a subscription, and
So people can order coffee wherever they're located.
Wherever they're located. We ship all over the United States.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Carlos Ramirez, I want to thank you for being our guest on this edition of Farm Talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And of course, we want to thank our sponsors, the Escrow Hub and the Money Store. And be sure to check out our next episode of Farm Talk.